At this time, let's go ahead and begin today's event, Getting Results Without Authority. I would like to introduce your moderator for today, and that is Christina Cleveland, Senior Director, Talent Development Solutions at Canadian Management Center. She has experience leading global project teams through complex leadership development implementations and partners with CMC clients to consult through the analysis and development of their leadership strategies. Christina, I'll hand the floor over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jess. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to attend this session. We actually have close to 900 people from across the country on the line with us today participating in this webinar focused on getting results without authority. And we're really excited to welcome you all to talk about a topic that is clearly important to all of you and something that we work through on a daily basis. For those of you who are new to Canadian Management Center, welcome to you. We're excited that you're here joining us. CMC is an organization that is headquartered in Toronto, but we do have national presence across the country. And our mission is to prepare the next generation of leaders. So we actually deliver a number of open enrollment programs as well as customized on-site solutions for our clients in a number of different topic areas ranging from management and leadership to communication and interpersonal skills and project management. We are very excited to be here today talking about the topic of influence, and we're hoping that you'll continue to join us in the conversations today, both in the interactive elements online through WebEx, but also if you are on Twitter, you can join us in tweeting today. You can follow us at Canadian Management, and if you tweet today, you can use the hashtag CMC events to track any key insights or commentary about today's session. So as it relates to collecting all of the information, I'm sure you will all be furiously taking notes. Many individuals do like to listen to the recording. So after today's session, you will get an email with a link to the recording that will allow you to hear all of the commentary. And then you're welcome to also share that link with any of your colleagues who might not have been able to join us today. So I do want to start off with why we are focusing on this topic and then introduce our guest speaker. So CMC runs our live webinars relatively frequently and almost on a monthly basis. And the reason that we are focusing on the topic of influence is because our clients have asked us to. So it is an important topic to all of us, but the primary reason is that influence seems to trump authority these days. And actually a recent American Management Association study on global leadership development indicated that more than half of the survey respondents actually defined leaders by their level of influence and performance and not by their position on the corporate ladder. So more and more we are seeing that the ability to influence is a skill that all of us need to develop. And even when we are in positions where we are deemed to have influence or authority, we may still need to call on the skills that are tied into effective influencing in order to be able to get the results that we're looking for. As we continue to see organizational structures change to become flatter and more matrixed organizations, we're called on to collaborate with different organizations, different individuals. And we've got people who are subject matter experts in specific roles that may not actually have formal leadership authority. There's a lot of project-based work that's happening that's calling on people to contribute their subject matter expertise. And the term leader really just applies to a broader audience. So there are formal leaders and there are informal leaders. And while we've seen that over the last 5 to 10 years, it continues to be on the rise. And generational influences are playing a role in that. What Generation X and Generation Y, as some of the emerging younger generations in the workforce are requiring and expecting from their employers, does involve them needing to develop their abilities to influence and collaborate. So it's a key competency to develop. It's important that we develop it early in our career. But a question we want to open up to you on the chat panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, is why is it challenging to influence? So I think all of us are aware and agree that influence is an important competency to develop, and that's why we're here today. But give us your feedback on the chat panel and tell us why you think it's challenging to influence. And while you do that, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Sean Casemore, who is a facilitator with Canadian Management Center and has been since 2011. And Sean has years of experience managing and leading teams in unionized as well as non-unionized environments, and in doing so has honed his ability to influence and build relationships. In addition to being a facilitator, Sean has also written over 40 articles on operational performance and leadership, including making contributions to CFO.com and the Globe and Mail, to name a few. So he is a consultant, he's an instructor at Humber College, and of course a CMC facilitator. And Sean does deliver our influencing programs as well as our 3-day Getting Results Without Authority course. So Sean, really excited to welcome you today.
Thanks very much. I appreciate, Christina, the introduction and kind of an overview for the day. I wanted to kind of throw in there as well, if you feel like including me in the conversations on Twitter, you can find me at Sean Casemore. Glad to be part of that as well. But I wanted to, most importantly, thank everybody again for joining me today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I'll tell you why in a moment, but let me ask you this right out of the gate. Did you catch the Freudian slip? Did you catch the Freudian slip when the program was introduced? By accident, I think the program was initially introduced, Getting Results with Authority. Now, you might think, okay, that's easy to do. Getting results without authority is more difficult. But let me suggest to you that a lot of the people I work with at all levels of organizations, regardless of title, to support what Christina said, are finding it difficult to influence others. And to get things done, it doesn't matter if you have a title. So this topic, and really the program that CMC offers, is good for everybody because we need to learn and understand how to be more influential. That's how we get things done through and with others. So fantastic topic for today. I'm glad to be here with you, and many of you actually connected with me earlier on Twitter and a variety of other platforms, so I appreciate you being here. Let's start then with the fact that on the next slide, we'll speak to the fact that you really have an impression to make, right? Many of us feel that we don't have the structure, the authority, the support, for example, to have our voices heard in the workplace. But in reality, we can make a difference. Whether it's up to the corporate, moving up the corporate ladder and dealing with folks, in the corporate teams, on boards, dealing with people in our own teams, our peers, we really have an impression to make. Now, think of that in this context. If you were to walk around the office and you've got your head down, you're not really speaking to people, you don't partake in conversations over at the water cooler once in a while, you don't really talk to many people. When it's quitting time, you run for the door. At lunch, you sit in the corner by yourself. And then you wonder, why is it that I can't really influence others? Influencing really requires that we interact with others. And what we're going to talk about today is a variety of the ways in which you can be more influential. So I think you'll find this a really relevant and interesting topic. Now, if we move to the next slide, let's talk about what influence really is. The definition we're going to use for today is that influence is the power to sway or affect a person or set or series of events. Now think about that for a second. Who do you think in your mind when you think of the word influence? I'll suggest many people, right out of the gate, the first thing they think is politicians. Politicians are influential. You're at voting time, you're actually influence to go to the polls and vote for someone, although you may never have met them face-to-face. All you know is what you see on TV, what others say about them, maybe some pamphlets or brochures that came to your house that you read. All of that is influence. So we're going to build on how you can become more influential today, and depending on your work environment, being a better politician may be a good thing. So to kind of kick this off and get us heading in the right direction, I want to move into a poll. So on the next slide, you're going to see a poll, and it's really a question for you, and I want to turn it back over to Christine just to introduce this.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Sean. So everyone, we are going to be opening up a poll on the right-hand side of your screen just to get your input. So you see the question that's posted there asking you who you'd like to be more influential with. So is it with your supervisor or manager, amongst a team that you manage, as an individual contributor in your organization, or with your senior leadership team? So take some time on the right-hand side of your screen to enter in your responses. And once we get the feedback through the poll, Sean will actually share with you some of the feedback that seems to be coming in about, why influence is so challenging, or why it's so challenging to influence. And what I thought was really interesting, when you mentioned the Freudian slip, I did notice that too. But one of the questions on the poll is asking about whether or not you want to be more influential amongst a team that you manage. So in that situation, maybe you have formal authority or responsibility for a particular group, but you're finding it challenging to influence them. So right now, responses are coming in. We'll give it another 30 seconds to just make sure everybody has a chance to contribute. But it looks like with my senior leadership team is coming out as the top response at 37%, and then as an individual contributor in my organization at 36%. Oh, and that just flipped. So it looks like as an individual contributor in my organization is where individuals on the call today want to be more influential. That's definitely coming out as a clear winner, Sean, so 38%. But in terms of why it's so challenging to influence other people, some of the comments that are coming in from folks participating is that it depends on the relationship with the person that you're trying to influence. Sometimes influencing in a virtual environment, so via phone or by participating in remote meetings makes it challenging. That it can be challenging to lead without having the position to go with it. That you may be perceived as just an administrative assistant. And there's a couple other people commenting about not having the power, not having the authority, not being respected because they don't have those things, past incidents that maybe have contributed to why they may not be able to influence. So a variety of reasons coming in, but the final poll results appear to indicate that people would like to be more influential as an individual contributor in their organization.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Christina, and thank you, everybody, for participating. And I want to make sure we continue on here because we are under time constraint, and I know you're very busy, and this is difficult to squeeze in, but let me just make a couple points here that I will expand upon as we go forward. What I meant by authority is sometimes it's a misconception that with authority I can be influential. If you think about the fact that many of those who have authority make decisions and make changes and make things happen, but the question that I would ask you is when that happens, are other people always happy with those changes? Do they always feel good about those changes? I'll suggest to you that sometimes the answer is yes, but many times changes, decisions are made by those with authority that may affect us or those around us, and people aren't happy about them. If you really want to engage people and get them involved in decisions and committed to decisions, you need to make them happy. You need to make them feel like they're part of those decisions. And the only way to do that is influence. And when I deal with business owners and presidents and executives today, they're all saying the same thing. I don't want to jam this down somebody's throat, Sean. What I want to do is get people to buy into this. So how do I do that? The way you do that is influence. And that's the very same things that I tell them is what we actually work with that we can use ourselves, right? I try and be influential every day. In my personal life, in my professional life, doesn't matter because it's a lot easier than trying to force things upon people. But with that being said, we'll talk about that further. Let's just continue on and we can come back to that point. So if you see on the slide in front of you, you'll see the elements of influence that we're going to talk about today. Now, you'll see it's really built upon three foundational components that we're going to discuss. On the bottom left, you'll see personal power. In the middle, you'll see personal style preferences. And on the far right, you'll see persuasion. We're going to speak to each of those and help you tap into how you might use those in order to increase your influence. Now, let me just begin with this. Let's ask you a question. If we flip to the next slide, what we can see is a question that I would like you to answer in the chat section on the right-hand side of your panel. The question is this: in what types of situations would you like to have greater personal power? And as you're thinking about that, let me define what personal power is. Personal power is the power, the ability that you have in order to be influential with others. Now, I'm going to explain what that is in detail in a moment, but before I do, I would like you, considering your own definition, just to take a moment and tell me what kind of situations would you like to have greater personal power over or greater influence over if you're struggling with that definition. Let me just take a second. I'll watch the chat panel and we'll see what comes up.
I think that's a great question, Sean. And just as a reminder to everybody, the chat panel is on the right-hand side of your screen, and there is a drop-down that you can select to chat to all panelists, and then that way Sean and myself will both be able to see the responses as they come in. Some responses coming in right now, some individuals indicating when in conflict they'd like to have greater personal power, when meeting peers from across the organization, in determining the strategic direction of the company, getting clear answers from others. Again, seems to be quite a variety. Are you able to see some of them, Sean?
Yeah, I can. We've got comments about conflict has come up a number of times, the situations you like to have greater personal power over. With shareholders, Leaders, again, there's when in conflict. So what I'm going to suggest to you and what we're going to put together today is a framework that you can use. And again, I think what you'll want to do following this session today is go back, listen to the recording that's sent to you, and take some time, pause the recording as it goes, and make some notes. You might find you're a little bit rushed at this time, although I hope you're still taking some notes as we go along. And actually, we're getting a lot of similar responses. So let me just take your responses, and with those in mind, let's move forward, understanding that you really want to concentrate on having greater personal power when it comes to senior leaders, stakeholders, board members, as well as when you're in conflict situations that seem to come up time and again. So that's what I'm going to use moving forward here. So let's then start with personal power. Now, the first thing I'm going to suggest to you is that unfortunately Tony Robbins could not come out for the webinar today. Speaking of personal power, we thought he should. He was unavailable, so I'm going to speak to the topic for him, and that is a little bit of sarcasm for midday to kind of keep us moving. Let me just show you, if you see in the slide, what you'll see is kind of a cycle. I don't want to explain this. If you think about personal power, it's really built on the fundamentals you see there, 7 different fundamentals. And I'm just going to start at 12 o'clock and work clockwise and just explain these, okay? So first off, personal power is built based on the network that we have. You know, I wished I knew at a very young age the power of a network just being those people that we know. Because I was, well, to be honest with you, born and raised an only child. I kind of kept to myself for the, I don't know, first 25 years of my life, didn't really deal with or speak to or create a lot of relationships with other people. And what I've learned is that to be influential, it requires a network, because being influential means that I want to be seen as someone who's credible. I want to have be able to tap into knowledge and experience of others. And the only way I can do that is if I have an expansive network. So think back to my example earlier on our discussion today. If you're the kind of person who kind of sticks to yourself, you've got a few friends, and you kind of keep quiet, and you don't really deal with others, it's going to be pretty hard to really bring out your personal power because you aren't tapping in or purposefully trying to expand your personal network. Now, the second, you'll see again at about 2 o'clock, if you think about this as going clockwise, is identify results. You have to be crystal clear at all times as to what you're trying to achieve. Now, let me give you an example of that. When I was in a working environment, I took a job as an individual contributor. I was an inventory analyst very, very early in my career. And right away I thought, I want to move into leadership. I want to be able to work with these folks on a different level. So I knew I wanted to move into leadership, and it began to really possess my mind so that things started happening naturally. For example, my boss, probably about a month into the job, called me over and said, "How's the job going? How do you like it? How are you getting along with your peers?" I said, "Well, it's going great, but I really would like to have a leadership role. I really think with my experience, I could be more helpful in that way." And here's some examples. When dealing with others in meetings, I stepped up and tried to take the lead to present the fact that I could be a leader. And I didn't do that in a commanding sort of way. I did that in a collaborative way. So you have to be clear on what are the results I'm trying to achieve. And those will change, but you need to be clear on what they are in order for you to direct your personal power. The third one, at again about 4 o'clock, 3:30, quarter to 4 on this diagram, is diagnose. Now, diagnose means that we're diagnosing the world of the other people we're trying to influence. Have you ever walked into a busy executive's office, you think you have something important to say, you tell them, and they look at you like a deer in the headlights, like they couldn't care less about what you're saying? What do? You turn away and say, "Wow, what a waste of my time. Why did I bother? They don't really care." Well, what you might not know is they just hung up the phone with a shareholder who is about to terminate somebody, or they just found out the business is going under. I mean, you would be surprised, and I'm sure many of you know the kinds of challenges that people at different levels, especially executives, are dealing with. So the fact that, Johnny came in late 3 times this week might not be that important at that time. Doesn't mean it's not important information, but we always want to be thinking about the other person's world, what's going on in their mind right now, and more importantly, how can I position this so that it makes sense and it's important and relevant in their world. Now you'll see bottom right, again about 5 o'clock or so, is exchange. Now, what we want to do with exchange is we always want to be prepared to exchange something of value. You know the old adage, you have to give to get. Well, it's absolutely true. And if you don't believe me, take a look around at your office, maybe even your desk. Do you have pens or calendars from personal investment folks or realtors or those people in your personal life? Do you know why you have them? because they're trying to keep their name in front of you. What they're trying to do is exchange. If they give you something in return, you're more apt to call them, right? That's the way it works in the world. And never mind sales. It does work that way in sales, but it works that way in the world. I want to ask you a quick question, again, using your chat panel and thinking about exchange. What is it that you think you might have to exchange that others might find of value? So if you just take a moment in the chat panel and just note one word, couple words, what is it you think you might be able to exchange with others that they might find of value? So I'm seeing knowledge, absolutely, that's with Joanne. Jennifer mentioned the same. Perspective, ideas, skills, people skills, financial analysis, a lot of knowledge coming up, experience, advice, positivity, time, donuts. Ashley, I love donuts. Well, I can't eat them anymore, gluten, but, you know, donuts are always fantastic. Your network, absolutely. Historical knowledge. So what you see and what we're seeing here, this is absolutely correct. We don't think enough about the power that we possess, right? I've got a lot of knowledge, but if I don't go around and talk to people and interact with them and diagnose their world, I don't know how I might be able to help. And invariably, oftentimes do arise where somebody says, oh, do you know how to do this? And you say, oh, of course, right? You ever referred somebody to your realtor or to your hairdresser or somebody, right? You presented them a situation and knowledge based on their needs, and it was helpful. And down the road, if they need something, or if you need something from them, guess what? They're probably going to return the favor. You know, we do this in our natural life with our friends, but we don't think about it in a working environment, but it works exactly the same. Now, moving on, again, around 6:30, 7 o'clock in this diagram, you'll see identify stakeholders. Now, the identify stakeholders piece is an interesting one. If we think about our personal power, the stakeholders, are those people who have an interest, have a vested interest. So let me go back to an example I gave you earlier. If you're going into telling executives something you think that might be important to them, the stakeholders in that situation might be other employees or peers that you're working with, your manager, other executives, right? Who are the folks that are also important in this picture? Because I want to make sure I'm engaging with them, I'm building a relationship with them as well. Because think about it, stakeholders can support our argument. They can support our position. They give us credibility. So we always want to be identifying who are the key stakeholders around this person I'm trying to be influential with. The next point, again, about, it's hard to hear, 8 o'clock or so on this diagram. You're going to get sick of the time metaphor, I'm sure, in a moment, is develop and grow relationships. This ties back to what I said at the very start. If you take nothing else away from today, you must constantly focus on building relationships, right? If you can do that, you will naturally become more influential. But if you kind of stick to yourself and you don't focus on relationships, you're not going to be as influential as you could be. So I don't think I need to explain that one. Always be seeking to develop and grow relationships, especially with new folks. Last but not least, upper left-hand corner, our influence. We all have within us an ability to influence others. We just need to practice the right approach, and I'm going to give you some more specifics on that. So the personal power model, it really says this to us, and if you look at the way the diagram is constructed, it really is a cycle. On a daily, weekly, hourly basis, what we need to be doing is thinking, who are the folks I want to be influential with, okay? What is the network of people that I have that could support me from a credibility standpoint and a knowledge standpoint, and that could help grow and expand my knowledge and ability? What are the results I'm trying to achieve? What is in the world of the other person? What's going on in their mind right now? What might I exchange with them that has power or importance or relevance at this time? Who are the other stakeholders that could assist me or support me, and how might I, work with or interact with them? How can I develop and grow relationships, and how can I as an individual be more influential? So personal power is really the ability that we have personally in each of these areas in order to be more influential. And if you're constantly practicing all of these, and it really is a cycle, it's not specific to one person, as you can guess, it's really something that's ongoing. If we're doing this consistently, we will expand our personal power and be more influential. Now, that is only one component of the influence tree, so to speak, if you remember that previous diagram. So with that being said, I want to move into the second poll, and what I want to do is, what I'll do is turn it over to Christina to introduce this poll.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sean. So everyone, again, same routine that we had before. A poll will open up on the right-hand side of your screen, asking you to just respond to which influencing strategy that we just discussed do you currently use most often. So developing partnerships, focusing on what you can exchange, building relationships, or observing the behaviors of others to determine whether or not you can influence. Sean, I just wanted to ask you to clarify, because develop partnerships and build relationships might sound a little similar to some of us that are participating today. If you wouldn't mind just differentiating between the two.
Yeah, absolutely, Christina. I find that question comes up more than any other. And if you look at them, build relationships. That is what I would do with folks I don't know, folks I want to get to know, right? I start to build a relationship. And again, we've all done that on a personal basis. Sometimes you do it at work as well, right? But we always want to be focusing on building relationships, because the more relationships I have, the more opportunities I have to influence, the more folks I have kind of at my ready to support my credibility and to support me in being influential. Now, developing partnerships, on the other hand, is a little bit different. I must know somebody pretty well to develop a partnership. So if I think about a partnership is where I identify that, you know, Christina, if I worked with you on something, it would be better than if I did it alone. Look at this webinar as an example today, right? If I was just to call up and try and do this on my own, it wouldn't flow as smoothly. We wouldn't have as much interaction. We wouldn't get to as many of the comments. So we've really partnered on delivering this webinar today. The power of two is much better than the individual one. So that's really how I define them.
Okay, great. So we'll give everyone another few seconds just to submit your responses in the poll now based on the clarity that Sean's given to us. Right now, I think we've got a clear winner, though, Sean, that over 50% of our participants today are indicating that build relationships is the influencing strategy that they use most often. And, you know, as we go through and reflect on the personal power model and what you've shared with us, if anyone has questions about specific examples or any of the components of the personal power model that Sean's described, you do have a Q&A panel, again, on the right-hand side of your screen. So you can select that tab and then enter in a question, because we will have some time to integrate those during the session today. But we've closed out at 54% of individuals, Sean, indicating build relationships as being the influencing strategy they use most often. Second
Great.
to that was developing partnerships, 19%.
Fantastic. Well, you know, I think then the good news is we're on the right track. And, you know, don't get me wrong, each and every one of those is an influencing strategy, and they all have a time and a place. The question is really around which one do you focus on most often? And I would agree with the majority that if you're always focused on building relationships, the power that can have, it probably trumps the amount of times in which you can be influential. Although, again, there's a time and a place here. You know, what I wanted to just suggest before I move on here is if you think about building relationships, it is something that we need to make sure we put effort into. You know, it's easy when we're sitting on the bus or, you know, taking a train or flying not to do anything. And sometimes what we have to do is set triggers for ourselves in order to force ourselves to build relationships, right? We're going to talk in a second about personal styles, and I'll tell you that my personal style is one that, you know, again, because of my upbringing, culture, age, demographic, all that kind of stuff, just going out there and building relationships is not a natural thing for me. So I have to put triggers in place to make that happen because I recognize the power it has. And one of the things I love to do, especially when I go to CMC, you head up the elevator. It's only, I think, 5 floors, but the elevator's packed. I force myself to say hi to somebody in the elevator. As uncomfortable as that is, that's a trigger because it's forcing me to deal with the uncomfortable, which means that when it's a normal environment, it's very easy for me to build relationships. So I just wanted to share that. Now, you're going to see on your screen right now the next slide, which is the power dependency model. With an understanding of what the personal power is that each and every one of us had within us, right, going back to that model and realizing that if I was to populate that model, it might look very different than your model. If I think about the personal power I have, it can vary depending on the individual I'm dealing with, right? I think that makes sense based on our discussions. So if we really want to influence others, we really need to consider 2 things. And I'm looking at the diagram. If you look on the left, the first thing I need to consider is, what is my personal power relative to the person I'm trying to influence? For example, an executive I've been working with for years, done special projects with, boom, probably figure I've got a fairly good degree of personal power. A brand new manager that's come into the company I've never met before, depending on how much interaction we've had, maybe my personal power doesn't appear so high, right? So I want to gauge that. The second thing that I want to ask myself is, what is my dependency on the person I'm trying to influence? How dependent am I on them being influenced to achieve my outcome? Okay, so an example of that might be, I've got a new manager, and let's say the previous manager had offered me a raise, and then he left the company. So now my raise is in limbo. The vice president says, you know, you got to talk to the next manager. He'll deal with it. The new manager comes in. I don't have a lot of personal power, but man, am I dependent on him to get that raise. So I have to kind of gauge, how do I approach this? So let me just walk through using that scenario in this model. So the way this works, you'll see on the left, my personal power relative to the person I'm trying to influence. At the bottom left is low, and then we elevate up to high. Again, along the bottom is my dependency on the person I'm trying to influence. And also, let me just see if I can do a little technology here. Yeah, look at that. Okay, fantastic. So dependency moves to the right, and my personal power ultimately moves to the top. So with that being the case, think for a second. Let's say in this situation, don't have a lot of personal power with my boss to get that raise, but I'm extremely, extremely dependent on them. What I'm going to need to do, and that would place me right down here in partnership, right? My dependency is high, my personal power is low, I need to develop a partnership. Now the first question you're going to ask is, well, how the heck do I develop a partnership with my boss? Well, think about it. Their goal, their objective is to have you to be productive and to provide value for the organization, right? If you do that, not only do you look good and make them happy, but they look good. If you underperform, not only do you look bad, but they look bad. So you can really look at that relationship as a partnership. So what I want to do is be able to exchange things of value with my boss in order to create and build upon that partnership. Now, let's look at the same situation again. My personal power is low, but let's say I don't need my boss for that raise. Let's say the VP says, you know what, once the new boss comes in, I'm giving it to you anyways. I just want you to tell them what we're doing and why you should receive it, but I'm still going to give you the raise. Well, in that case, my personal power would be low, my dependency would be low, and I would be right down here, monitor need for influence. So I'd say, okay, no problem. I'll run it by the new boss, but I know I don't need him, so I'm just going to say something like, you know, the VP said based on my work that he is going to give me a raise. I thought I would let you know, but, you know, for what it's worth. Right? So I'm just really monitoring. I don't really need to influence them, at this time. I'm just monitoring the need. Now, the next example, let's say my personal power is pretty high. This is a boss I've been working with for some time, but again, I'm very dependent on them for this raise. What I'm going to do is focus on exchange. That puts me in the upper right-hand corner. So I'm going to think about the fact that in order to get this raise, what do I need to do? Are there special projects I need to complete? Do I need to stay late to support my boss? Do I need to attend meetings for them? What can I exchange that's of value to them? Last situation, same scenario. Let's say my personal power is still high with my boss, but my dependency is very low. All I'm going to do is build a relationship with them then, right? So I don't need them to get this raise. I've got a lot of personal power. What I'm going to do is just focus on building that relationship, because over time I want to make sure I have future opportunities to grow and expand in the organization. So you can see how this works, and that situation might not apply to you personally, but what I want to suggest from this diagram really is that in order to use your personal power to be influential, you have to consider what is your personal power relative to the person you're trying to influence, and how dependent are you on that person in order to achieve the influence that you'd like. So with that being said, let's move on to the next slide, and let's talk for a moment then about exchange. So yeah.
Sorry, Sean, I know because we did ask this question earlier and many people responded, but it just as it relates to the topic of exchange, we have a couple questions coming in terms of the fact that exchange feels a little bit like tit for tat, right? So just wondering whether or not you can comment on, you know, in some cases you may be offering or exchanging your expertise and not getting anything immediately in return, and sort of like how that builds up in terms of an emotional bank account, to use that term.
Absolutely, and you know, I think the way to think about this, Stephen Covey talked about kind of the theory or the concept of the emotional piggy bank, and what he talks about or speaks about in some of his books is the fact that what we want to be doing is constantly making deposits, right, with other people, and what we're doing is really building up that piggy bank, so to speak, of credits. So the fact that, you know, I'm not going to go in and say, and again, I'll stick with the same scenario so as not to confuse this, but I'm not going to go in and say, you know what, boss, I finished that report, it's actually done early, I added a title page and I binded it, therefore I get that raise. It doesn't work that way. Exchange is really about if I'm thinking about that person's world and what they might need, and then I'm balancing that against what might I offer to help them. Over time, I'm building up that bank of credits so that down the road when I need something, there's a better chance I'm going to be able to influence them into giving it because I've given them something in return. So it's not a one-for-one deal. It's building up those credits. And what you're always going to find is the credits that you have in the bank, you want to keep them higher than the amount of deposits you want to withdraw, if that makes any sense at all. Do you think that answers the question, Christina, for what you've seen?
I think so, and everyone else, feel free to comment in the chat panel back to us or in the Q&A if you have any follow-up questions.
Please do. Well, we're going to take a moment and talk specifically about exchange. So I already asked you the question earlier, what do you have to exchange? And what came up really was, and again, I'm looking at some of the comments here, access to your network, time, knowledge, experience, could be specific knowledge, dedication, ideas, expertise, credibility, creativity, energy. All of those things are things that you have to exchange. And I find more often than not when I first sit with people and talk about influence, what they say to me is, Rashawn, I got nothing that other people want. If I'm dealing with my boss, they don't care. They've got other priorities. And that's the wrong perception. We all have something to exchange. It's of value. We just have to think, A, what is going on in that other person's world, and B, what do I have that might support them? And right now, maybe it's nothing. Right? So I'll give you an example, a situation where I'm trying to deal with an executive. I was trying to be influential with them because they were kind of indirectly impacting me in my role. I was trying to build a relationship. It was slow going. And then one day I stumbled into his office for a reason. I didn't just stumble in. I walked into his office. I had a meeting with him. And I caught him on the phone, and he was talking about a situation with, I think it was with his daughter or with his son or something at home. And he hangs up and he looks at me and says, oh, kids. And I said, well, I've got a couple of my own. What kind of scenario are you dealing with? And suddenly he said, well, I'm dealing with this. And I said, I had that exact situation. Here's what I did. And he said, well, that's a great idea. That kicked off that discussion much better than it could ever have gone otherwise. But what I was doing was A, listening, watching for opportunities, B, thinking about their world, C, showing interest in it, and then offering something of exchange, which in that case was an idea, which some of you have targeted. But as you can imagine, this is always on. This is like a light switch. You always want it on. Maybe turn it off when you go to sleep. Otherwise, leave it on. So if you think about then all the good things that we have to exchange, that really helps us in that situation where we're trying to build our power, our personal power amongst others. Now, let's move on then to the next slide, which talks about our personal style preferences. Now, I'm going to speak to this one just briefly here, but and actually I'll just jump onto the next slide and then I'll speak to it a little bit more. Everybody really has their own personal style, right? Meaning everybody's different. The question becomes, if people are different than us, does that mean that they're better or more right or more knowledgeable than us or not? Well, the answer is it depends. Most often, if you think about those around you, the people that you really connect with well, you really get along with, whether it be in personal life or in business or at your organization, in sporting teams, it's because those people have a very similar style to yourself. Whereas the people you don't connect well with have a very different style than yourself. And we have to realize that not everybody is the same. There are different styles of people. Now, for the time we have available today, unfortunately, we can't go into great depth on analyzing personal styles. But what we need to do at least is think about the different styles of other people. So if you think about those you collaborate well with, that's great. That's not difficult for you to connect with them. But think about those that you don't connect well with. And let me give you an example of that. I personally am not good with data. If you were to drop a binder on my desk with pages of research and data and say, here, Sean, I think we should do this, and here's the supporting information. When you leave the office, I might skim through it. Chances are I wouldn't. I would just either ask you for your opinion or I'd make a judgment myself, right, based on my knowledge or experience, or I'd ask others to provide input. But to sit and go through that information, for me, would be painful, not my thing. Now, that doesn't mean I'm right or wrong. Other people love getting into information and data, right? My father was an accountant for his entire career, and he loved information and data, right? So what we have to realize is that everybody is different. And if we're diagnosing the world of the other person, then we can present ourselves, our ideas, in a fashion that they're receptive to. So if I was to go into somebody who I felt liked a lot of information and data, I wouldn't just walk in and say, hey, here's what we should do. I would walk in and say, I've spent the time to put together research and information. I'd love for you to review it. And then if we could sit down later and talk about it, I'd really like to talk about how this influences where we're going as a business organization, whatever the situation is. But I've got to diagnose that other person's world and then try and cater to their style in order to be influential. Because ultimately, when you focus on the style of the audience, then they begin to see you as someone who's credible, right? That person that walks in with a lot of data and information to somebody who wants that is much more credible in their eyes. Now, let me just explain quickly when I'm speaking credibility what I mean. You'll see on the next slide that ultimately your credibility exists strictly in the other person's mind, not in yours. So, you know, I said earlier on, authority doesn't always mean that you're the most influential person out there, and I mean it. You know, I was for about 15 years, I led folks in a variety of organizations, and I found once I got the title of supervisor, manager, senior manager, it seemed to matter less, right? I had to use influence to get people to buy into what I wanted them to do. And when I would go into an organization as a new employee, even in a leadership role, I had no credibility, even though I felt like I had. Man, I have the experience. Doesn't really matter. I have to convince them that I'm credible, right? So we always want to keep that in mind. If you think other person don't see you as credible, ask yourself, why would they see you as credible? Are you catering to their personal style in order to build credibility? Now, let's just jump into another slide on credibility here. We've got a few on it. Being credible then really exists of three different components, right? And this came out of some studies that we've done. When you ask people what does credible mean, it means that people see you as an expert, someone who knows your subject well. It means that others see you as trustworthy. Right? You're seen as somebody who has others' best interests at heart. And you're seen as consistent. Words and actions that you take are consistent. You know, think about those people that say one thing and do another. They're not very credible. So in this model to be influential, we need to focus on being credible, which is really built on catering to the styles of other people. Now, with that then, we want to talk about the last component of influence, which you'll see on the next slide, which is persuasion. See, credibility, relationship building, and understanding personal styles will ultimately help us to be more persuasive. And here's a way to think about persuasion. Influence is kind of indirect. I could sit back and try and influence you through media, letters, you know, cracking a smile, mimicking your body posture across the table from you. But persuasion is more direct. Persuasion is when I'm having that dialogue with you. It's the words, the phrases, how I position things. So you can see how this builds up to being more influential. If I'm judging, engaging my personal power and always trying to build that personal power, then I'm considering your personal style preferences and how I present my case to you to kind of cater to those. Then the last piece is the persuasion, which is when I have the dialogue and I'm kind of, you know, bringing all this together, so to speak. So if you think about persuasion, there are really three different components of persuasion that I want to speak to you about, and you'll see those on the next slide. They start with, ultimately, let me just, oops, sorry, my screen changed on me. Ultimately, they start with these three areas. If I want to be persuasive, it starts first with discovery, okay? And you'll see some common themes here. Discovery is understanding my audience and their point of view. So if you think about persuasion being the dialogue piece, so I've thought about and tried to enhance my personal power with this person, right, which means I've spent a considerable time on that cycle. Then what I've done is I've gone and said, okay, now I think I know their personal style. Let me think about how I'm presenting information to them so I build credibility with them. Now I'm going to sit down and actually have a conversation to try and get what I need. These are the three components I go through. So let me think again about my audience's point of view. How might they be approaching this situation I'm going to speak about? Right? And what I often do is plan out my scenarios, right? If I say this, what are their possible three responses? And I try and prepare for those responses. The next is then the preparation. How do I align and position my views, my beliefs, my ideas with what this person, what's in their best interest, right? So I want to align myself with the other individual. And then last but not least, I have the dialogue. And when I'm having the dialogue, I'm appealing to emotions, not just logic, but emotions. So let me give you an example of what this might look like. Let's say I decided I was going to try and convince another executive to allow me to join their team, that I'm working in my group, but I really want to work with his team. So I've really thought a lot about my personal power, and I think I've built it up with them. I've also judged the fact that they're very more analytical mindset. They like data and analysis, and that's maybe not natural for me. And now I'm going to actually have a conversation with them about this. So I'm going to say, okay, when I present the fact that I moved to their team, what might their possible responses be? Right? That's my discovery point. Then preparation. Okay, based on those responses, how might I respond that caters to their personal style and their needs? So it doesn't look like I'm out for me. It looks like I'm out to support and help them. And then I go and have the dialogue, and I don't just focus on, logic tells me this is what we should do. I say things like, I think I could bring to this team a lot of, morale and excitement and energy that they need based on my experiences over here. That's the emotional side. You always want to consider, and I'll never forget this statement I heard at a very young age. Logic makes people think. Emotion makes them act. If you want to be influential, you not only want to have a logical argument or a logical discussion, you want to appeal to their emotions. You want to get them excited. You want to make them passionate, and you need to demonstrate that as well in your discussion. So what we've done there in a very short period of time is I've covered influence and the 3 key elements of influence. Now, we only had a short period of time to go through that, but I hope that's given you a framework that you can apply moving forward in order to be more of an influential person. So what I would like to do at this time is really turn this back over then to Christina for Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean. And there's been a lot of conversation that's been happening and questions that are coming in. And I personally am benefiting, again, from just, going through this session. It's amazing that, we've rehearsed the content and gone through it before, but, today's a new day, and I've got new situations on my plate, and, I'm getting some great insights from you. So thank you. One of the questions, or a couple of the questions that are coming in are tied to that concept of exchange that we talked about, Sean. And one person's asking, what do you do in an exchange situation where you feel like you're giving more than you're getting back, whether you're giving to an individual all the time and they're just not reciprocating, or you're not able to kind of, get that exchange actually being a true exchange?
Well, and I guess I would think about that in a couple ways. There are what I would call sponges out there, right? There are people that will always take and take and take and not really give too much. Those people are rare, and I don't think we want to go around and prejudge that. But the reality is, when we are in exchange, we are always giving more than we're receiving. In fact, we're trying to do that. I don't know from, let's say, if I needed something from you, Christina, I don't know how much I would need to give to get there. So I'm better to give and give and give, so that when I take something, I'm probably not tapping my balance, if you know what I mean. So when we're in an exchange situation, we are always giving more than we would like to get in return. And keep in mind, we have to judge what is the value of what we're offering to this other person. Maybe you're giving them a lot of stuff that they really couldn't care about. And I don't mean that brutally, but I've been in a position where I've said to people, I was going to provide this, but I'm not sure if that's of value to you. Is it a value? And if not, is there something else you prefer? Because, I'm always surprised at how much I learn in a very short, over a 2-week period. I can change my perspectives based on the experiences I have. So sometimes if I'm not sure, I ask people. And if you do it in the right way, nobody gets offended.
It's a great suggestion, Sean. And someone was also asking just about, how do you make the exchange appear genuine? Because I think in some cases, depending on the individual you may be working with and whether trust is high or low, they may be skeptical or suspicious about why you want to offer up, whether it's your information expertise and so on.
Well, and I think the way to think about exchange is we don't go in with the intent of immediately taking a deposit. If you think about personal power, and I can't speak to anybody else's life here, but if I think about what I do on a daily basis, I'm always trying to offer stuff to people, and it doesn't mean I have a preconceived notion that I do need something from them. I think I may need something from them someday. It goes back to that power dependency, right? I do a lot of monitoring for influence. So if I can help somebody, I'll help them. Now, I'm not going to help the telemarketer, but if somebody called me and said, I have a question, and, somebody sent me a note on Twitter with a question, I'm going to respond. Now, when I do that, I don't expect they're going to blow it up and add 5,000 Twitter followers and help me. I'm responding because I'm always willing to give, right? So I think it's the shift in mindset that if you need something from somebody, exchange is not the only way. It's one of the ways to get there. But if you focus on always assisting and helping people, as much as that can be time-consuming, if you're always doing that, especially with key stakeholders, you'll be in a position that when you do need something in return, they're going to help you. Most people will be helpful, and you'll be more influential.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so what about developing relationships when there are generational differences? To kind of switch us off of exchange and moving back to developing relationships. What are your thoughts or what suggestions do you have for the group about, if there's a gap between your generation and maybe what you need or value and expect? How do you suggest that people bridge that gap?
Well, I think everybody, that's on this webinar today is well-versed in the differences in a lot of the generations. And, if you aren't, CMC's put together a brand new fantastic program on this if it's something you're really challenged with. But what I would say is this, I know enough about the differences that if I'm going to deal with somebody who's maybe 70 years old, I know, going into it that their perceptions, their views, their ideas and thoughts are very different than mine. So I need to be prepared for that, and I need to respond to that. It really is, think about it in this way. Whether it's generational difference, cultural differences, work experience differences, knowledge differences, it doesn't matter. Put yourself in the shoes of the other person, right? What would they like to hear from you, see from you? If you can do that, then you can position yourself, your ideas, views, comments, etc., in a light that they're going to be more receptive to.
And coming back, I'm going to bring us back to exchange again, Sean. And I'm interested that there's so much discussion happening around that particular topic. But somebody made the suggestion and question about whether or not the idea of exchange and letting people know what you have to offer, like how does that correlate to personal branding and like helping people understand, your value and what you have to make available?
Well, to me, those are two slightly different topics, because when you say personal branding, I think more about someone in business versus someone who's, working in an environment, but that's just my own perspective. And as we've discussed all along, my perspectives and everybody else's, we all see the world through a different lens. But, if I go back to thinking about, if I want to let other people know of the value that I provide, there is no music unless you toot your own horn, unless you make it. And if you keep that in mind, especially in today's environment where everybody's on social media touting, how wonderful their life is, I think really being influential is really about giving and helping others. And if we do that consistently without regard for ourselves and our needs, then when we do need others, they're available to us. Now, if I was in a working environment and I wanted to target somebody and I felt like, gee, I really want to exchange something, but I don't know if they know that I can offer that. Again, I go back to my statement earlier. Yeah, I'm maybe not that good with words, and I've said things to people like, I can do that, or I've done this before. Is this something you need? I mean, I can be very direct, and again, that's a personal style difference, but I think you can pretty much say anything to anybody if you put it in the right positioning and the right words at the right time. People can be very receptive, and then you learn about what people are receptive to and what you can offer that to exchange, and you can increase their knowledge of your capabilities. So I hope that's answered that question.
And question, I brought us back to the visual of the personal power model because someone had asked the question about where does proposing solutions and options fit into the personal power cycle when you might be trying to influence an outcome?
Where does proposing solutions and options? Well, to me, that's really the results, right? Well, no, I shouldn't say that. Let me go through we've got the slide up here. Let me just show you on the slide. If you think about this, if I'm using personal power, when I'm diagnosing the other person's world, I'm really thinking about what's going on in their world, and more importantly, and I didn't mean to make that a D, but that worked out well. More importantly, what is it that I can offer to them that's of interest to them? So for example, I can offer a lot of stuff to a lot of people, but when I'm thinking about a business executive as an example, or somebody in a senior position in a certain company, what are the challenges they're dealing with? And I may even ask them that to learn more about it or listen into conversations without eavesdropping, obviously. But if I'm in that position and I diagnose their world, then when I'm thinking about exchanging, I'm looking at what do I have to exchange that would be of value, which is where I'm looking at different options, and I may present them as options. when you contacted me initially and we talked about doing this webinar, Christina, I asked you a few questions. I basically gave you some options as you did me. I said, well, how would you like to do this? Would you like to run the polls or would you like me to run the polls? Would you like me to manage the question and answer session or would you like to? What I was really doing is posing options to you, and in turn there were times when you were doing the same. We were really focusing on exchanging value and helping one another through a partnership to make this a more valuable experience. But what we're doing there is using our personal power. So to me, considering the different options and ways I can support people, it comes in a few different areas here. I mean, even when I'm thinking about being, influential with people, it really depends on the situation, the specific situation, but it does come into play several times.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean.
And
well,
I do have, Christine, I just have, somebody sent me a private question that I think is something I can read out loud here, so if that's okay. The question is, and I won't read the name just because it was sent to me privately, what's the best way to ask for a promotion when you've been doing stretch assignments for a long time? Well, I don't know your boss and I don't know your working environment, but in the last 5 promotions I had, I kept telling people I wanted a promotion. I would tell my boss, you typically get an opportunity to sit down with them and they say, how's it going? Or you're giving them an update. And I'd say things like, I'm really looking for the next opportunity. I think this assignment has positioned me well for that. It goes back to the tooting your own horn thing. So I typically indirectly and gently asked for those opportunities for a promotion. But if you look at my track record, there was sometimes that worked out well, sometimes it didn't. If it didn't, I tended to move on. But again, that's a personal style difference of myself. So we could go quite deep here, but I think what this individual that asked the question needs to do is, try and turn these stretch assignments and the results of those assignments into an opportunity to talk about your desire to move forward in the organization. Pick and select different roles that you'd like to pursue and tie in how these assignments prepare you for that, and then be prepared to speak to that with others, that have influence over that, such as stakeholders, your boss, etc.
Great recommendation, Sean. So just because we are getting close to the end of the session here, I do want to just draw everyone's attention to the idea of next steps. And I think we were able to answer some questions today, and I'm sure that everyone was thinking about their own individual situations as they thought about the session. But what we've suggested to you in terms of some next steps is think about where you want to focus. So today would have just started the conversation within yourselves about some of the influencing opportunities that you have available in your current environment. So think about where you want to focus and identify something that you learned today that you can actually apply to those situations, and then make a bit of a commitment to yourself about what you're going to do next. So as we mentioned, each of you will get an email with a recording to the session so that you can come back and play it back and have Sean with you so that he can talk you through some of the elements of influence and the personal power model at a later date, because as I said, even for me personally, I'm listening to the session again and new situations come up all the time, and there's a lot that we can benefit from just sort of refreshing ourselves on this concept. So Sean, thank you so much for your time and attention today and participation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
So as we said, you can follow Sean on Twitter at Sean Casemore, but you also have the option to follow us at Canadian Management if you if you are active on Twitter. We will be asking individuals today to tell us what you think. So when you actually wrap up today, you're going to have the option to complete a survey to give us your feedback and let us know what you thought about today's session and give us any ideas that you have for what we can do better or differently, and also for any future topics that you'd like to see covered. The other thing that we wanted to make a note of for you is that we do have a 3-day Getting Results Without Authority session that some people were asking about, and there is an incentive that you may have seen posted as you were waiting for the webinar to start that will be offering a 25% discount onto our 3-day Getting Results Without Authority program for any session that's running between now and the end of this year, calendar year of 2014. So if you are interested in trying to participate in that course, now that you've learned some techniques to influence, you may be able to influence your leader to have you attend that program, but you can check it out on our website at cmcoutperform.com. So we are at the end of our 60 minutes together, everyone. Thank you so much for your active participation and to committing an hour of your time to your own development. And we'll look forward to seeing you online at a future event. Thank you.